Hey guys, it's Jen and Kelly. Welcome to Her Book of Job, the podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Her Book of Job, the podcast. Jen and Kelly here. This is episode 8, Sackcloth and Ashes.
Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. James Baldwin.
So today, Jen, we are talking about a pretty deep subject. As the title suggests, Sackcloth and Ashes, we're talking about periods of time or seasons in our lives that are particularly dark, where we're feeling hopeless, we're feeling depression and despair. Why do you think it's important to touch on this in our podcast?
I think it's important simply for the fact that in life, we all go through, very dark and depressing times. And sometimes, we deal with these things by ourselves and no one really knows about them or hears about them, right? And what we try to do here with Her Book of Job is just really talk about those things that are extremely difficult to talk about, so that you as the listener know that you're not alone in the things that you go through.
Absolutely. I think it's important. The other reason why I think this subject is super important is because sometimes people have the misconception that when you're a Christian or when you're a believer, everything's just supposed to go well for you. Like somehow suffering and problems are out of the ordinary. Like they're strange. Like it shouldn't be happening to you. And sometimes when people are Christian, they're like, "Hold up. Why is this happening? What's going on here?" And I think it's super important to just clear that misconception up that no one under the sun is exempt from pain and from suffering, and that, like you said, it's a just universal truth. It's part of the human experience to go through despair um and to go through hard times. So yeah, and it's just not something that's glamorous and that people want to talk about, but yet it's just one of the most human things we can experience and go through. It's so real, and it's so important to discuss because, like you said, a lot of times people suffer alone or suffer in silence. So hopefully, if you found your way to this podcast, you're not alone, and yeah, you don't have to go through it by yourself. And yeah, you can open up and talk to us and hear our experiences, and just know that, whatever it is that you're experiencing or going through, like that quote you shared from James Baldwin, we can't change it unless we face it.
Definitely. And I have had many sackcloth and ashes moments in my life. Like you said, Kelly, it is a part of life. No one is exempt. These things tend to happen sometimes on a continuum. We're living in a very sinful world, and no one goes a full life without, absolutely nothing bad happening to them. I know a low point for me was actually after we graduated from BU. uh, oh man. I, at that point, after we graduated, or just before we graduated, I wasn't doing well in school. And I didn't graduate with the degree that I had set out to do. So imagine leaving school after 4 years and having, basically nothing to show for it. That was very tough because not only was that time wasted, but it was a very just disappointing time. And on top of going through that, my relationship with my boyfriend at the time exploded, and that was also difficult to navigate with the disappointment, in the academic end of things. And I just literally, after grad, I just literally didn't know what to do with myself. I was home for 8 months, and because of everything that was going on, I just could not get a typical, post grad job in a field. I didn't really have a field after grad to enter into. And so I ended up getting like this little job at Calgary Stampede. But, during that time, I was just so depressed that I couldn't even keep that job. I couldn't make it through the time period that I was supposed to work there. So when I left the job, I ended up staying at a friend's house. And I was on her couch crying every single day God sent. I was I was just a mess. Like I just couldn't get off that couch. I just cried and cried and cried. During this time period, during this 8 months, I just thought to myself, okay, Jandai, what are you going to do? Like, how you get into a tough situation and you just start, trying to think of ways you could climb out of that hole. I just didn't know what to do. And my dad watched me through this period. And honestly, Papa Ferrari, like, he came through, you know?
One time for dads.
Yes, one time for the one time. Like, yeah, dad really, he really came through. He saw my little pieces and he started picking them up, and all these little broken pieces of me, and started putting them back together and started helping me think of things that I could do. And because of how school went, I couldn't get into a master's program, right? And so he's like, okay, you can't do a master's program right now. What about, you go and teach English? And I'm like, does this man see what I just went through? Like, who's going to hire me? Who's going to hire me to teach anything? I had the roughest time in school, and, no one would accept me for a master's. So I'm like, who is going to hire me to teach? Long story short, I ended up getting a job and I went to Korea. And that was the beginning of a healing journey for me. But, you know, as life would have it, even though I was going through that period and I'm like, okay, I'm getting over my relationship, I'm getting over the disappointment that I've just faced with school and my career and, like, my dreams and goals, and none of that is happening for me. And I'm in this pit of depression. I got this breakthrough, and this healing journey started when I went to Korea. But when I came back, fast forward to this year, I would mark this as the worst year of my life. And, just as I was feeling, or starting to feel like I was, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, as they say, or just feeling like, okay, I have these goals and I'm reaching them and I'm getting there. I had since left Korea. I went back to school. I was getting my life together. Things seemed promising. I wasn't as depressed as I once was. I was hopeful for once in my life. And then the first half of 2021, oh boy, 2021, my brother tragically and very unexpectedly passed away. And nothing in this life prepared me for that day, for that moment. Nothing could ever prepare me for how I was going to feel, because you don't, if it's unexpected, it's not something you prepare for. You don't see it coming. There's nothing you can do. And so I don't remember the doctor's name because I totally blacked out, but I remember the moment when he walked into the waiting room. When he walked into the waiting room, he said those words that no one really no one wants to hear this. I remember it distinctively. He walked in with his colleague, and I'm standing there waiting for him to speak, and all he had to say was, "I'm sorry," and I knew. And the rest of that was, "I'm sorry, but we did everything we could." And I didn't cry immediately because I was so shocked, Kelly. What could I like I just no tears, like not I just couldn't. I was just like frozen there in utter disbelief. All I could say in that moment was, "Thank you, doctor. Thank you." I was so hurt. I was so hurt. But I felt like in that moment, like I just needed to be strong for my parents and my little brother,
Wow.
because as the oldest sibling, you kind of feel the need to be the warrior of the family.
Yeah.
I continued this conversation with the doctor, but I can't remember what we spoke about. But I remember talking to him, and once he left, I saw that my family, they had each other, they were hugging, crying, and we had a family friend who was there to support and stuff like that. And so I had a little moment, and I went out into the hall, and as I was in the hall, my friend walked in, and when he walked in, he just gave me a big hug, like a strong hug. And that's when I wept.
Mm,
I wept.
yeah. That's when it really hit.
Yeah, that's when the moment, like I just like released everything, and I had no feelings in my legs, so my friend literally had to hold me up because I could not stand. I couldn't stand. A really hard part for me was having to say goodbye. I stared at him for a while, and I felt like I could just literally die in that moment from the pain that I felt just watching my brother laying there. It's something that I will literally, never forget. Like you never forget that moment. And so once we left the hospital, at the time I had crochet twist in. Like like your twist, but then crochet twist, girl, right?
Of course, of course.
Yeah. So I had a set of those in, but when I tell you, after I came back from the hospital, I didn't want anything touching me. I didn't want anything in my hair. And I remember I just got a pair of scissors and I started cutting them out, just hacking at my hair basically. And in doing that, I didn't realize that some of the twist had my hair in it on the perimeter, right? You know how you do that to kind of like conceal the look, right? And I
So you were cutting your own hair without knowing.
yeah, without knowing. So I ended up cutting a chunk out of my hair, my natural hair. And I remember holding the hair in my hand and just sinking to the floor. And for a split second, Kelly, I promise you, like for a split second, I thought like I don't know if it was like a psychotic break or like a moment of insanity. I went to the washroom and I grabbed my dad's clippers because I was just going to shave it all off. I just didn't know what to do with that. I'm like, okay, this is the worst day ever, and I'm here cutting off my hair. Like this is intense. I just want it all gone. I don't even know how to explain to you, but I just literally wanted to shave all of my hair off. And luckily, my mom, she was around, and I told her what happened, and she told me, she's like, "Don't cut it, don't cut it." Like she really was kind of like a presence there for me, because if she wasn't there, I think I would have just gone for it. But that day, I just literally felt like I was having an out of body experience. I felt like I was someone else just looking down on my life, and I just literally couldn't believe what was happening. And, this experience definitely left a mark on my life. After going through something so traumatic like that, I was thinking to myself, how do I now come on her Book of Job, the podcast, and inspire people and tell them a message of hope? And when I absolutely had none, none whatsoever. Like that was the lowest of the low. I just didn't know how to come back from that. to the podcast and, have these amazing conversations with you and with people who listen to us and who support our pod and who comment and engage with us. I just didn't know how to come back, because here I am talking about hope and you got this and overcoming and stuff like that. And here I am on the worst day of my life, and the months are going by, the weeks are going by, and I just didn't know how to come back. I wanted to be happy. I wanted good things to happen to me, but I was having these HBOJ moments. That's what I'll call it. This Her Book of Job moments in real life. This wasn't something that I was reflecting on. It was happening to me. Can I be real? I don't have the answers. This really spoke to my humanity. I don't have the answers. I don't know how to overcome this. And I'm currently on the journey of overcoming right now as we speak today. I'm on this journey. And, I keep falling on these hard times. So what is the message here? What are we trying to do here with Her Book of Job? How do we continue to go through life with these ebbs and these flows and still manage to push through, to push forward with hope for the future? Because life can be very difficult. And yes, I had this issue, after we graduated BU, and I felt like there was no future for me. I felt I was getting no's left, right, and center. I just didn't know how I was going to go back to school, or in the case of the relationship, if I was ever going to find a partner again or love again. And, it's these periods of uncertainties. And then, I kind of came out of that and I was doing well, and I went back to school, and I'm like, yeah, okay, life is getting back on track. And then, my brother dies, and then I'm swallowed back into this pit that is difficult to come out of. And I'm grateful for this opportunity we have on Her Book of Job to just really come on here and talk about the hard times and what happens in life. And I'm grateful for this opportunity, this platform that we get to share with one another how hard life can be, but also, this message of hope. And I'm glad that I've come to this place where I can come back on Her Book of Job and have this conversation with you. And to our listeners, yeah, I'm going through it right now. I really am. And I can't tell you how I've overcome, because I'm literally in this journey. And I feel like this is what this pod is about, is talking about this journey that we are on. Sometimes we don't have it all figured out. And sometimes, yeah, we are sad in the moment. And I'm definitely really, really sad right now.
I appreciate the transparency, and I know our listeners do too, Jen. I love the fact that you're like, hey, I don't have the answers. And I don't think that's what this is about. At least not today's episode, anyway. Today's episode is not really about having the answers. And I just want to take a moment to talk about sackcloth and ashes. And for people who may not be familiar with what that means or where that comes from, like in Bible times, when people were going through really dark times and moments of inexplicable grief, of overwhelming despair, where you don't have the words to express how you're feeling, they would tear their clothes and they would wear like these burlap, think of like a potato sack type of thing, like really rough clothing, and they would put that on, and they would literally sit in ashes and pour ashes over their head. I mean, just imagine what that looks like for a second. And that would be a way of expressing what was going on inside their heart. And what I really want us to take out of that whole thing is that they sat there in it. They sat in the ashes. They weren't looking for, it's not about an answer, and it's not about, figuring it out or whatever. Sometimes it's just about sitting in it and being in that grief and in that place until you're not. That's the thing. It's like you just got to be there. You just got to sit there. And sometimes you just got to feel all those feelings, and you just got to mourn, and you've got to do whatever it is that you got to do. But to me, Jen, it's like as you were speaking, in a weird way, you're also giving us a response to how you're dealing with this, because you're still here, aren't you? You're still here. You're still getting up every single day. You're back on the podcast. I mean, you see what I'm saying? You're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this while you're actually doing it. You know, but my thing is for our listeners is like sometimes we, especially in the Western culture, we're so like microwave people. We want things overnight. We want things quick, and we're impatient. But a lot of things in life are about a process. It's called a season for a reason, right? So when we're going through a dark time, a dark season, it's gonna take time before you get out of that season. And sometimes the only thing we can do is sit in it and sit in those ashes and just be in that moment. And like that quote from James Baldwin, we got to face it. We can't run away from it. We can't try to avoid it. Let's not put on our nice clothes and act like everything is okay. Sometimes we got to tear our robes, put on those sackcloths, sit in those ashes, and weep. That in and of itself is healing and therapeutic.
Some time ago, you said that Joe wins the suffering Olympics. And I just thought that was like so interesting when you said that, and was wondering, like, when you said that, what was the reasoning for saying that? Because here we are, we're looking at this man who lost his kids and gets sick and is going through all these things. Why should we look to Job as the winner of suffering Olympics? What could we glean from that?
One of the reasons I say that is because sometimes we can have a big pity party for ourselves, and not to invalidate or belittle any of the experiences either of us or our listeners have gone through. But the point is, nobody has lost their all of their children in a day and all of their property and then got sick. Like all of that stuff all combined, like his grief was compounded. And the point, and I'm being facetious when I say suffering Olympics, obviously you can't compare suffering, right? Suffering sucks no matter what the cause is and no matter what we go through. But my point is that he is such a model for us because he didn't do anything to deserve what he went through. And that speaks to what I was saying in the beginning. Like sometimes we assume or expect that because we're good people or because we're believers or whatever our because is, that this should not happen to me. I don't deserve this. Well, that's besides the point. The point is we all experience suffering. And so Job gives us this amazing look at how to deal with it. And he sits in those sackcloth and ashes for most of the book. I mean, Job is a pretty long book. It's like 30 something chapters, and most of it is him in his depression. There's a very small section at the intro that tells you when everything was going well, and there's a very small section at the end in the conclusion when everything is restored for him. Thank God that Job does have a happy ending, y'all. But that's not the point to me of the book. That can't be the point because that's not the subject of most of the book. Most of it is him dealing with this sackcloth and ashes season. That's what it is. It's 30 chapters of weeping and mourning and not wanting to be alive and not wanting to deal with it and wishing that he was never born and wrestling with why. And also, in the midst of all that, still holding on to faith. That's the point.
Throughout all of that, or these seasons of sackcloth and ashes that we face in our life, it's there's a strong, what's the word, there's a strong desire, I don't know if that's the right word,
Yeah.
but you get to this point where you want to curse God, you want to be mad at God, you want to lament and ask him why, and say, oh, I don't believe in God anymore, or why would he do this to me, and stuff like that. But what I find interesting is that Job didn't do that.
Well, I mean, Job still asked God a bunch of questions, right?
He did, but he didn't curse him, right?
That's the thing. And I think that's the lesson for us. The lesson for us is as we go through this book is to see that you can still have faith and ask why. You can still be a believer and be sad. You can still follow Jesus and wish you were never born. That's the beauty and complexity of Job. That he, in the midst of all of that, the Bible says he never sinned. In the midst of all his sadness, his depression, his questioning, his why God, all this stuff he was asking, the Bible acknowledges that he actually never did anything wrong, even in all of that. I think that's encouraging for us because sometimes, people have this stereotypical Ned Flanders from The Simpsons version of Christianity where everything is okily dokily. Like no matter how bad things are, you're just supposed to smile and be like, I am blessed and highly favored. It's okay for you to be like, no, my life sucks. And and whatever those feelings are, it's okay to acknowledge them. That does not make you any less of a believer. So I think that's what's so beautiful and so powerful is that depression and sadness are not a sin. And when we're feeling down and when we're feeling, when we're in those dark places, God doesn't condemn us. He comes down into that darkness with us and he comforts us. Like I mentioned in another episode, he's near to the brokenhearted, right?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't go, he doesn't sit up there and go, after everything I've done for you, I'm such a good God. How dare you be sad? He doesn't do that. He doesn't shame us for our sadness.
So what you're saying is that when we're in our pits, right, of despair and sadness, we can ask God why we're going through these things. Like it's okay to ask, because you made an interesting point there. You said that Job did ask, but he in the whole process while he's going through this sackcloth and ashes moment, he never sinned against God. So I just thought that was so interesting because a lot of the time, I don't know, I guess I've just been, under the impression or have been taught, I don't know where I got it from, but it's like you don't question God.
I mean, I don't know where people get this idea from because the Bible is full of conversations with human beings and with God. And if you, all human beings since the beginning of time have always had questions. Of course, you can question. I mean, if you are out there and you can find the Bible verse that's like don't ask God questions, please show me. But there's a difference between asking God a question and then, just letting go of your faith, completely rejecting or renouncing God or saying, you know what, I'm done with God because I'm going through this. God is not real. I'm done. Forget it. This Christian thing is, see, that's completely different. But to say, Lord, why? I mean, that's just one of the most human responses to any kind of pain. Why? We want to know why. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with asking that. In fact, the latter part of the book is God answering. If he had a problem with the questions, he wouldn't answer. Now, you might have issues with how he chooses to answer. That's a different story,
Mercy.
because he answers Job in this really weird roundabout way, which I love. He's like, you know what, Job, you've been asking me questions for the last 30 chapters. Why don't you get yourself together, gird yourself like a man, and I'm gonna ask you questions now. So God's like, yo, you answer me, and he starts to just go in, right, about where were you when I laid the foundations of the world. In other words, man, I'm God. I run this. I have wisdom and power and goodness that you can't even comprehend. Anyway, that goes besides the point. The point is God actually comes and addresses Job. That's major. He comes and he has a conversation with Job. That's really what we should get out of that, is that if he had a problem with the questioning, if he was offended, you think he'd leave his throne, come to this puny earth to have a conversation with one guy?
He wouldn't, because ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly. But I want to encourage everyone that's listening that he's the one that's got time for that. Whatever it is that you're experiencing, God is not afraid of the darkness. He is not afraid of whatever is the deepest, darkest moment of your life, and He wants to go through it with you. And the thing about Him, He ain't gonna fast forward it. He's gonna sit in them sackcloth and ashes with you. I mean, that's one of the most loving things someone can do. Everybody can hang out with you when life is good, but when things are terrible and somebody's willing to sit in that awkwardness, in that discomfort, and in that pain with you, what greater expression of love is there than when someone gives you their presence, right?
That's true. It reminds me of how I was telling you guys when my friend came to the hospital and he literally held me up. I see that as how God holds us up in these moments. He shows up in the hallway. When you step out and you have your moment on your own and you're by yourself, he shows up in that hallway and he holds you up. He lifts you up. And that is something amazing that we have to hold on to for sure.
Just to bring everything back full circle, in the beginning, you're like, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Something that I think sometimes we misunderstand is that we often want to change a situation, but sometimes we're the ones that's being changed. Everything that we go through, everything that we face changes us. And if we allow God to hold us up through those dark moments, then that change can be for the better. You know, we can actually come out with stronger faith, with deeper, more persevering character, if we allow Him to just sit with us and hold us up. He can actually use the worst things in our lives to change us and to make us better and to make us more like Him ultimately. You know, so you said something earlier and I wanted to correct it. You said that when you finished Berman, you know, you're like, you wasted, that was time wasted because, you know, of what happened with your degree and different issues like that. But I just kept thinking to myself, there is no wasted time, especially not for someone who's a believer. Nothing that we go through is wasted. God uses everything that, if we let Him, He uses everything that we experience to be a blessing for us in one way or another. And I really hope that this doesn't come off as cliche to anybody listening. I'm really serious about this. You may not see it, you may not understand how, but God promises to work all things together for the good. So there is no I wasted my time in that relationship or in that program or whatever it is. God uses all of the ups and all of the downs for our good in one way or another. So I'm hoping that you can see that, Jen, that there are no wasted time periods in your life. There's none. There's none. Even if it feels that way, God is using all of it for our redemption. You know, so be encouraged, man.
Thank you so much for that, Kelly. Thank you so much for that, Kelly. I needed that. I needed that word because, you know, I have the temptation to definitely look back on that period of my life as wasted time. But what you've said is really going to help me moving forward. And now, when I look back at that time, I'll look at it in the way you've just expressed, and I think that that will definitely help me moving forward because it's definitely a sore spot, but the way you explained it just then is definitely giving me a more positive way to look back at that.
Well, I'm super happy that God could just come into our little podcast right now and encourage us, all of us who are going through our sackcloth and ashes season. You guys who are out there, if you're so inclined, please go on our YouTube in the comment section. Let us know, what are you going through or have you gone through that were just those really difficult and dark times in your life? How did you get through it? Are you still going through it? Do you need someone to just sit in it with you? You know, just be encouraged that, of course, God is there to be, you know, to sit there with you. But, you know, if you want to talk to us about it and just get it off your chest, we'd love to hear from you and encourage you in what you're dealing with. So, yeah, please leave us a comment. Don't forget to follow us on IG. And yeah, let us know if you're enjoying the content here on Her Book of Job, the podcast. This has been episode 8. I'm Kelly. That's Jen. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.